Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Welcome to this Bain live case with Management Consulted. I'm really glad that you're here with us on this January 14th. Happy New Year. I don't think you can kind of say that enough. We might be getting towards the end of when it's appropriate to say Happy New Year, but I'm going to keep juicing it as long as I can. My name is Japheth Mast, Director of Marketing here at Management Consulted, and we've got a fun session for you today. A couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in. Please stay on mute for the duration of the session. We will take questions throughout in the chat, so I will be answering questions as we go throughout this session, and then we will take some live Q&A with our special guests at the end, so in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. So we'll take as many questions as we can then. So you can either save your questions for the end or just type them in, and I will answer them as I am able to. We've got folks tuning in from a lot of different places. LinkedIn, welcome. Glad you're here. YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Exciting to see so many folks tuning into this session. TikTok and Facebook, folks joining in as well. Super glad you're here. If you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button to get more of these content like this. If you're on LinkedIn or any of the other platforms, make sure you're following us to get daily updates on consulting news, on case interviews, on salaries, and much more. And also, if you're listening on the podcast afterwards, make sure you're hitting the subscribe, the follow button, whether you're on Apple or Spotify or Google Podcasts or Amazon or anywhere else. We're glad you're here. I'm looking at some names, familiar names and faces here. If you're a black belt client, go ahead and rename yourself here in the Zoom chat. Just add like a dash and then black belt, just so we can know who you are. Give you a special shout out here. Thank you for joining. We appreciate you. We love you, and we're excited for what 2025 has to hold for you. Okay. Well, I think that's all of the admin. One more quick comment here is that we're going live every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, starting in February. So make sure you're tuned in on LinkedIn, on YouTube, etc. for a live session, whether it's a case, whether it's a business breakdown session, whether it's a kind of a case interview insight session. We've got a lot of amazing content planned for 2025. All right. All right. Well, 3 quick announcements here before we get into the session. I know the majority of you are candidates for consulting. You're prepping for a case interview, and you're here to kind of figure out what you're doing. And we've got a lot of ways we can help you. And so you're about to meet one of our incredible MBB coaches here on the call, Tobe. We've got a team of about 25 former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG coaches who would love to work with you one-on-one to work through cases, to help you get a custom prep plan and work through that and ace your case interviews. So we got 3 options here on the screen. Got just the 1 hour at $250. We've got our full-fledged black belt program, which is 8 hours of coaching, resume and cover letter edits, support with a networking process and a strategy with that, and just guidance throughout all of recruiting. The January cohort closes tonight, and there's just 2 spots left. So check out the code here on the screen to learn more and to join black belt. And last but certainly not least is our super prep program, which includes 20 hours of coaching. So it's really end-to-end support for those of you who are like six months out or more from expected interviews. And so that gives you the 20 hours of coaching, resume cover letter edits, a spot in our strategy sprint consulting project that kicks off February 1st, and a whole lot more. If you're a student at a partner school, check your management consultant account for a discount on these programs. Amazing. All right, I'm seeing, all right, Alina, welcome, black belt. Glad you're here. Barton, amazing. Thanks for joining us. Chris Morse, hey, good to see you. Let me make sure I'm not missing anybody. Got a big crowd on hand today, which is exciting to see. All right, cool. All right. Well, it's about time to get into the session. So with that, I'm really excited for this case and for you to meet Tobe and learn from him. Tobe, I would love to hear from you. Can you just give us a kind of a 60-second intro of who you are, your background, and kind of a little bit of your philosophy as you're coaching candidates to case interview mastery?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, I'm Tobe. I guess background as far as this is concerned, worked at Bain from 2020 till about mid 2022, so just around 2.5 years. Before that was studying. Before that was working at PwC. So that's sort of my background. I guess my claim to fame is that I went through the entire process without any feedback points. So that was sort of like my bit of my tiny, tiny claim to fame. But yeah, since then, been tutoring and helping candidates who have been trying to get into MBB because I interviewed for Bain, but for other consulting firms as well, and joined management consultant last year, and it's been absolutely amazing. So that's a bit about me.
Lovely. Thanks, Tobe. Excited to hear from you. All right, we've got one more intro for Sean. I'd love to have you come off of mute and tell us a little bit about yourself as well before we dive into the case.
Perfect. Thank you for having me here, guys. So my name is Rashan. I'm a first year MBA at Carlson School of Management, University of Minnesota. Originally, I come from Pakistan, did my undergrad in mechanical engineering, decided to pivot into supply chain, worked in supply chain 4 years back in Pakistan. Eventually decided, I wanted to go for supply chain consulting, decided to build on that with business acumen and financial knowledge. That's why opting for the MBA. Done with the first semester, so that's pretty exciting, and currently recruiting on the consulting track.
Lovely. All right. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate you volunteering, raising your hand to do this in front of a live audience. You know, bravo. Hats off to you for doing that. Excited for this. Okay. Well, amazing. That's all the housekeeping notes. We're at quorum. It's time to get into the session. So I'm going to turn it over to Bay and Rashawn to really demonstrate kind of what you can expect to see in an MBB level of case interview. And right, MBB, that's the highest level of case interview. If you're preparing for MBB, like you'll be prepared for any other types of case interviews, whether that's boutique firms, whether that's more of like a corporate strategy or an in-house consulting type of role. So I encourage you to have a pencil and paper and to be able to follow along with this case. Cool. All right, Tobe, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. So we're going to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes, probably a little, well, somewhere in between that time, working on the fit part of the interview. It's going to be a truncated version of it because of time. So normally it could go 15, maybe 20 minutes as well, sometimes in real life. But just to get a bit of a flavor for that, and then we'll switch over to the case study. And I'm going to share my screen just to make sure everyone's involved. And Rishon, you are very bored for doing this live in front of everyone, by the way. So I will try and go easy-ish on you. But yeah, onto the fit. So thanks, Rishon, for joining us today. It's been great having you through the process. I'm just going to go through a couple of questions. And maybe first of all, we'll start by looking through your CV and your journey. So I have your CV in front of me, so you don't have to regurgitate the entire thing. Maybe tell me something that's not on your CV and how that's drawn you here today.
I think the part would be, and I think that's an interesting fact, is I've had the opportunity, to see the entire life cycle of a company. So, just coming in as an undergraduate, who doesn't know anything about supply chain or any company. So, being the founding member of a startup, actually laying down the foundations for the supply chain, scaling it, expanding it, and then eventually, actually also, participating in the liquidation of the startup and up until the end point. I think, that's been an exciting journey. That resume might not truly capture, but I think, that's truly been an awesome experience, in terms of learning, in terms of honestly just the experience itself. So I think that's something, that really goes a long way, to describe who I am.
Okay, makes absolute sense. And I guess what triggered that journey from startup to where you are right now in front of us?
So absolutely. I think, working in a startup, it's working with a lot of fires every day, working on a lot of problems and, iterating on your own. And I think, that's something that I've picked up in two aspects is, I've seen that side, we're working on strategy yourself, but, I really want to, work with excellent people, intellectual people, like-minded people, who are, tackling that, those problems on a daily basis. And then, talking about those problems, I think in consulting, you have the opportunity to, work on exciting problems each day in terms of industry, in terms of even, whatever segment you want to do. So I think those two would be the reasons, working, with people who have more experience than me and learning from them. And then secondly, working with a myriad number of problems, to expand my learning.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions, well, probably just one each in this case because of time. So one to do with a past situation that you've been in the past and
Yeah.
how you dealt with certain problems, and then a future facing one, so a hypothetical one,
Mhm.
for which you can also draw in past experiences if
Mhm.
you want to use that as an anchor. So Rashawn, describe a time to me when you've had to work with someone who had a different perspective or opinion. How did you handle the situation and what did you learn from it?
Perfect. I think, working in a startup, you get daily encounters, because you're working with this, diverse set of people. I think the encounter that I had, would probably be the CFO. So the situation was, that I was leading the national expansion for Chuknu. That was a startup based back in Pakistan. As the person who was leading the expansion, we were actually deciding on, which of the fulfillment centers or, which cities we wanted to expand into. Eventually, the problem arose, that we were deliberating when we wanted to expand. So the timelines of the expansion, were up to question. I actually had a long-sighted approach where I actually wanted to make sure that we were able to, do our due diligence on the plans, see all the risks, see all the hiring timelines, and then actually incorporate. The CFO, based on a number of his perspectives, wanted that we expand, in the short term because they wanted to drive the revenue from another city. So I think that's somewhere, where the disagreement rose in one of the meetings where I was expanding and, expressing the strategy plans. So I think the task at hand, was actually seeing the perspective of the CFO and, actually also delivering, what my perspective was. So based on that, what eventually I did after initial meeting where I, presented the expansion strategy was actually locking a one-on-one meeting with the CFO to understand, what their perspective was and, where they were coming from. Based on that, I was able to understand what exactly their ask was and, which obviously went along, with the broader strategy of, what the company wanted to achieve in the short term. I then, in that meeting explained my perspective on, being on ground, having, seen things, how meticulous planning would be able to, add much better results in the long run. Based on that, I did that. So the CFO asked me to draw up an exact Gantt chart or like a timeline plan on, how the exact each steps would go. I did that, worked on that extensively, built out several numerical models where I showed, how the short term and the long term would go, how the profitability and the revenues would look. Locked in another meeting, where we actually went back and forth on, several perspectives on the presentation. Eventually, what we decided to do was, that based on that, come down to a middle ground. We were actually not in the long run, but in the short run, a medium size, timeline we were looking to expand. As a result, I think what we achieved was two things. The CFO in itself, had some more trust on the expansion strategy because of the meetings that I did with him. We were able to launch the fulfillment center, with a lot more meticulous planning. The rollout and the launch was super smooth, and eventually, we did, increase our revenues in terms of launching West.
Okay, that sounds really interesting and impactful. So looking forward, hypothetically, imagine you were staffed on multiple projects across two partners, potentially across two geographies as well. So London, Amsterdam. This is actually possible, pretty rare, but possible. How do you prioritize delivering for clients to a very high standard while also making sure that you are checking in on your well-being?
Perfect. I think, if you're staffed in two projects and, I'll just draw back, from my past experiences, working in a startup. So on a daily basis, you have to do a lot of, different things. So you have to handle the management stuff, handle the ongoing operation stuff. I think I would draw, from that experience. The first thing is to understand the nuance and, the kind of project that I'm doing at each location and each geography and with each partner and the kind of relationship that I have and the kind of role that I'm playing. Based on that, the kind of role that I'm playing in each project, I can sort of ascertain what kind of impact I have, what kind of value addition I can do, and what's expected of me. So I think considering those variable factors, essentially a project, which has maybe a shorter timeline, which has more expectations of me, and where I can add more value and more impact, I think that's the one, that gets the first priority. Other than that, then the second project just naturally follows along. Uh, in those, two things, it's also important to, maintain a work-life balance. So, at least personally, what's worked for me is having a very disciplined and organized calendar. So ensuring all of my meetings are locked in, all of my connects with the team are locked in, and also my expectations and connects with the partners are locked in. So having bi-weekly connects on the projects to see where we're heading in terms of direction, where we're expecting how my performance is going on each of those projects. I think those would be important. So I think organized calendars, communication, and just having a bird's eye view of each project, I think that's going to help me prioritize better.
Okay, sounds really credible. Maybe just wrapping it up right now. What's your biggest driving force in life? What drives you as a person?
I think the biggest driving force would be finding purpose and delivering impact. I think that's what drew me to the startup as well. We were working with retailers on ground. We were creating daily impact. We were adding value, and I think that's something that I seek to do in everything that I do. So I think even for the case that I'm doing right now, I think I'm adding value for you and I'm adding value for myself. So I think that's the main pillar that I strive for. Whatever I do on a daily basis, that has some impact on myself or or the company or the person that I'm working for.
Okay, that concludes this part. I was actually going to give feedback at the very end, but I think because we're dividing this into fit and case study, it probably makes a lot of sense to actually just give feedback now. So on the fit section, at least. So on the CV walkthrough, so I'll just talk through what went really good, what could have been improved on, and then what I think is an overall score as well for each question. So I felt like overall that was a bit of a 7. It was a very interesting sort of off CV story with the life cycle of the startup, really concrete reasons for why you were transitioning into consulting. I think what was missing and why it wasn't a 9 or a strong 8 or a 10, which is, yeah, pretty unattainable, is that I feel it wasn't storyfied. So on the CV section, you don't want to sort of list out things in a bullet point form. You want to make it seem like you're connecting the dots, even though we all know that many times we're all just leaving in randomness. There's some sense in trying to make the dots connect and make it sound like a bit more of a story. But otherwise, the actual concrete points were really good. It's just about trying to maybe storyfy that a little bit more on the CV and keeping it to under about a minute and a half, I think is very possible as well. So on describing a time when you had to work with someone and had a different perspective or opinion, I thought that was a very strong answer. So it was an 8. So what I liked about it was that I think you were highly structured. You clearly were using the STAR method. So for anyone who doesn't know, but I'm sure everyone on this call who's here probably knows, it's situation, so STAR, situation, context. You want to spend about maybe the first 30 seconds laying that down. It's sort of like in a Disney movie when you find out that potatoes can talk. They usually use the first 30 minutes to make sure everyone understands that. So lay down the context and then the task or the challenge to be solved. So what exactly triggered this thing? And then actions. And here you want to be quite staccato. So this is a very, very, very good time to sort of just go bullet points. So the way Rishan handled the CV question. So I did this, I did that, I did this. If you can put numbers to it and quantify it even better. Then the results. So I thought that was a very strong part. You want to sort of, again, put numbers if you can. I think it always makes it seem better. So I thought you were really structured. I could tell where you were on every part of the case when you transitioned from situation to task to action to results. I think to make that an 8.5 or 9, it would have been nice to add a nice flourish at the end. So the reflections, I know Bain were pretty keen on this when I was interviewing, and that's still a thing where you sort of reflect through how you could have handled that situation a bit better or what lessons you drew from that going forward would have been really nice. I thought it was a bit long and it could have been a bit more concise. So it felt like it was edging towards 3 minutes. I think it could have been maybe 2:15 to 2:30. And then finally, maybe working on switching up your cadence when you are going from one point in the STAR method to the other. So when you're going from situation, task to action to results, it was really structured, so I could tell because you took some pauses, but maybe switching up your cadence just so that it doesn't get too monotonous as well. Could have been really good to push it up to a 9. So I thought your strongest answer was, the hypothetical, imagining if you were staffed on multiple projects, how would you prioritize that? So I thought it was a very strong 9/10. I thought the story was really strong overall, like you storyfied it. I think what you did really well there, that a lot of candidates don't do, is that they don't always borrow from past experiences, even when they're, because it's a hypothetical situation. I think you always should borrow from past experiences. And you were just really structured, very high impact story, like very little to improve on there. And on the driving force in life, I mean, it's not really a scored question, but I think it's one that usually throws some people off as well. So it's just one to have an answer for. But I thought that was a really good answer, by the way. But yeah, it's just worth thinking about because it makes you seem a bit genuine. Awesome. So now we can transition to the case. Uh, there might be some questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll try to answer them at the end of the entire sort of case. So yeah, let me know if there are any questions and just put them in the chat. But now we can transition to the case. Awesome. So today we're working on the Indian Premier League. It is a cricket league in India. For any American viewers who are not familiar with the wonderful game that is cricket, it's a fantastic game. So it's one of the most popular sports in Asia, and not Europe, probably just Britain, to be fair. It is a very British sport, extremely British sport. But just sort of liken it to American football. Very different paces, but it's a really big league essentially, and very big sports. Okay, so the Indian Premier League is the world's largest domestic cricket league, and it is selling new team licenses. The IPL, the Indian Premier League, has seen tremendous growth in the past few years, attracting 300 million viewers each year. Our client is a US-based private equity firm that is wondering if they should invest in this opportunity or not, and would love your advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think, someone, from Pakistan, who has grown up, watching cricket, it does seem like an interesting business problem to solve. And, I've seen IPL, I was just, watching the recent test series. So, definitely an interesting problem. So, just so I have all the facts correctly, I think the situation at hand is, the IPL is, settling out new licenses. We have a private equity firm, who wants to invest. And essentially, we want to see, whether that's the right move for them. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect. I think so. Just to get started, I have a few basic questions on, so essentially on the private equity firm, uh, what do they mostly invest in? Is that something, they're doing for the first time investing in sports, or is that something they've done, previously as well?
So it's a really good question. So our client has some experience, not in sports. It's the first time investing in sports, but some experiences with sort of not sports teams, but sport nutrition.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Uh, Also want to understand, what the measure of success for this, acquisition or, purchasing of this license is. Do they want profit? What exactly are they looking for?
So they're excited about the cross-selling opportunities that the acquisition can provide, overall, including some synergies within their portfolio companies, and they would like to generate a 20% return minimum.
Okay, perfect. And since you mentioned portfolio companies, do we have any other sports, portfolio companies in their portfolio?
Any what? Come again, please.
So do they have any other sports companies in the portfolio?
So no sports companies, but some opportunities to cross-sell products
Okay,
to a potential team they might buy because of
perfect.
sports and nutrition.
Perfect. That makes sense. Can I have a minute to orient and see how I'd like to approach this problem?
Absolutely. Take your time.
Perfect. I think, I know how I want to approach this. So I think my
Okay.
hypothesis, going in would be, that it definitely seems like a lucrative enough opportunity, for the
Hmm.
private equity firm, to, purchase a license from IPL and, invest it in a team. I think in order for that, I would like to evaluate 4 areas, and I'll talk about them broadly, and then we can go, deeply into all of them. So I think firstly, I want to understand, the cricket and, the IPL market segment in India. It definitely is, a huge segment, but what it encapsulates, what are the numbers? That's something I'd be interested in. Moving forward, the second thing, definitely want to understand, the private equities firm's capabilities. So in terms of internal capabilities, external capabilities, since it is sort of like a cross-border, acquisition per se, or purchase of a license, definitely want to understand how that plays in. Thirdly, also want to understand, synergies, because, we mentioned, they're looking to cross-sell products, with some of, the companies in their portfolio. That's something we might be interested in. Finally, I think the fourth thing we would definitely want to be looking at the financial due diligence and risks as well. So in that, we want to talk about, what do the numbers look like for, the purchasing of the license and other regulatory stuff. Does that seem like a fair approach? And, I'd be happy to run you through each of, the segments.
Yeah, no, that seems pretty good in terms of buckets. Or maybe run me through a few drivers or a few
Sure. Absolutely.
activities within those work streams, essentially.
Absolutely, I would love to. I think so. Starting from the first bucket, that is the cricket and IPL segment. I want to understand what the overall market looks like in terms of advertising revenue, streaming revenues. What the revenues have looked like for the past teams. What kind of teams are there in the IPL segment, and what do their owners look like. What has the growth been like for the past few years, and what does the growth look like projected into the future. That's something I'd be interested in. What are the returns and the profits for other franchises? That's something I'd be interested in as well in terms of market. What kind of customers, to watch it? Is there also opportunity to cross-sell, our products to those customers as well? That's something I'd be interested in. In terms of firm capabilities, definitely want to understand, do we have the experience, to manage an IPL team? Would we want to partner with, another entity to actually run the operations? Who would be running the operations, for running the decisions? What does a sales and marketing, strategy look like? So, after purchasing this license, how do we want to go about it? I think importantly, you do have cricket expertise. I think that's most important as well. In terms of synergies, I am actually looking at sales. So, how do we plan to, actually synergize well with the team? How do we plan to cross-sell those products? In terms of management, even, because, we're talking about having some sports nutrition products, can we, derive some exact synergies, some experiences from that? And finally, for the financials, want to understand what the numbers look like for the license, what the returns could be, what the IPL due diligence looks like. Definitely interested in some regulatory factors as well, since it's a US firm, purchasing a license in India, are there any risks associated with that as well? So those are all of the important factors I'd be looking at. I think the important perspective, at least from my experience, would be starting with looking at, serving the market to see if it is the right fit for us. And, for that, looking at the market numbers, the growth would be a great starting point.
I think that's really sensible to start off with the market, but I want to take this in a slightly different direction. So if we're looking at potentially the valuation as well, we're obviously going to have to be looking at the projections in terms of cash flows, and specifically would want to project out revenue and want to project out a few cost items as well. You just run me through very quickly some revenue items that you would expect, and then some cost items as well.
Sure. So I think based off the revenue items, definitely want to, I think, segment it off into, two broader strategies. The first, segment would be, categorizing it streaming or advertising. So something I think that's not from the team itself. And the second revenue segment, would be the cross-selling of the products. So in the first one, I want to understand, what the streaming revenue looks like, what the advertisement revenue looks like. Those would be important to understand. And secondly, I think in the important broader bucket, would be the cross-selling of the products. So in case we're able to invest, how much of the revenue we can generate from additional sales in a new geography. I think that's important. In terms of cost, definitely want to be, breaking it down into, some of the fixed and the operational costs. So fixed costs, we would be, the idea would be having an idea around what's the purchase of the license cost look like, in order to, maybe hire the team or set up a facility or set up an office back in India. What would that cost look like? And then B, in terms of operational salaries, definitely want to understand we want to be hiring the right team for this. So a director, a strategist, the players themselves. So, IPLs, they're known for, paying the players a lot. So, what do those costs look like for the players? And essentially, what does it cost us to run, the franchise, on a yearly basis? I think those would be important numbers.
Okay, that sounds very, very sensible. So I'm going to share an exhibit and I'd love you to tell me what you see, walk me through some insights, and tell me what the average profit per team looks like as well for that exhibit. So just give me 1 sec and I'll share my screen with the entire group.
Toby, I can't hear you. I think your mic might.
Sorry, can everyone see my screen? Grand. So if you can just have a look through that, rot me through
Perfect.
what you've seen and what the average profit as well is.
Sure. So I think based on this, essentially just, orienting myself to the exhibit, we do see a bar chart, where there is, multiple teams. So we have 4 teams. On a 3-year basis, we can see, what the average profit per team has been. So, based on the bar chart, we can definitely see a trend in terms of the average finishing position as well. That's what we have below. So, 1.3, 4.3, 3.3, 1.7. So I think definitely interesting to see, that the teams with the greater profit, they have the greater average finishing position. I think that's one of the initial conclusions that I can definitely draw. But I think I would love to, crunch some numbers, maybe on an average basis if you want me to. What does that look like per year, or, maybe for like one franchise as well? I would love to do that.
Yeah, sounds fantastic.
So I think based on that, we can definitely take a yearly approach. So just 1 second. Toby, if you could have the exhibit up, I think that would be great in terms of the numbers, or
No worries. Just give me 1 sec. Fantastic.
Fantastic. And I think, firm that I would like, or the franchise I would like to focus on are maybe the Mumbai Indians and the Rajasthan Royals. I think, they have the greater, higher average profits. So definitely want to understand, what their average profit has been for the 3 years. So I'll do it for the Mumbai Indians first, maybe. So we can see 2020 as 25 million. Then we have 30 million for 2021, and 2022 is roughly around 27.5. So I think based off that, 55 and 27.5, 80, roughly around, is it okay if I round it off to 85 million for the Mumbai Indians? Is
Yeah,
that
rounding off is fine.
so perfect? So 85 million for the Mumbai Indians. That's going to be 85 divided by 3 as expected profit. So that's roughly going to 2. So roughly around, I think 28 million, that's the number that I'm seeing for the Mumbai Indians over the past, 3 years. And for the Rajasthan Royals, just judging from the trend, not crunching up the exact numbers, it does look like somewhere, in between 25 and 30. So roughly around, the same number, 27, 28 million. So I think, that's a fair, expected number that we're seeing, for the average, teams that are, placing high. For the teams that are placing low, I think the number would roughly ballpark around 17 to 18 million, as I can see from Kolkata Knight Riders or Punjab Warriors. So I think based on that, since we're a team that's coming in, as a new franchise in terms of expertise and players as well, we can roughly ballpark, what our profits would look like. I think that's the approach that I would, take. And essentially that would help us answer the initial question that we had, whether this makes a lucrative enough sense. I think so to ballpark it around 20 million. I think that's the number that I have in mind. Is that a fair number to work with?
I think that's fair if you assume that they're going to sort of be somewhere in the average,
Yeah.
which I think is a very fair assumption. I think if you assume that they could invest and actually be a winning side as well, then you might want to benchmark that a bit higher. But I think that's a very fair place to start. So uh, I'm going to show you another exhibit, and I'd want you to tell me what you think our client's bid should be as a result based off that exhibit. Just give me a couple of seconds, and I'll flash that up. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I think based off the exhibit, initial thoughts, we're looking at two things, revenue synergies and synergy analysis. We also do have a note that the profit multiple 25x should be used to calculate the value of the team. And assume that Gallery can set up a championship winning team. So I think that goes hand in hand with the information that we had in the past. So what the number we decided for maybe championship winning team, or the teams that positioned higher, that was roughly around 28 million. So I think that's the number that we can work with, since our client can set that up. And in terms of revenue synergies, we do have some numbers. Uh, what I essentially want to do is based off, the profit multiple of 25x, would want to multiply that by the average profit that we had, that was 28 million, to see, what the overall profit would look like. And then, segment that into revenue and cost. So, in terms of revenue synergies, that would roughly be around, I think, 15. And, cost synergies would be around 7 to 8. And based off that, find out what the exact numbers would be. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yep, that sounds very sensible.
Perfect. So just taking the number that we had, 28 million for a championship winning team, 28 divided by 25, 8 multiplied by 25, be right. That's 4, 46. So we roughly have around 700 million in terms of profit that we're expecting. So that is a great number. Definitely want to benchmark that against, what the expected returns for the private equity firm have been in the past. But, based on my initial hypothesis, I think the number does look creative enough, for the firm to invest in. So further segmenting it into the revenue synergies and the cost synergies. So the revenue would be roughly 15. So am I right to assume, that the revenue synergies and the cost synergies work in proportion? So revenue synergies would be 15 over 25 of the total pool of profit that we expected to generate?
Not exactly. So we have the profit, which
Mhm.
is one thing. But then these are synergies that the private equity fund thinks that they can extract based off the portfolio companies that it has as well.
Ah,
So it
got
sort
it.
of split them into the revenue synergies it thinks it can extract, and then the cost synergies it thinks it can extract as well.
Perfect. So then the idea would be, taking the numbers for the revenue synergies, that is 15, and multiplying that by 700 million, and then taking the number 8, roughly, 8 or 7, for cost synergies, and multiplying that by profit, to see, how that would fade up. Does that sound like a fair approach?
So not quite in the sense that I guess if you want to take the approach of thinking of yourself as a buyer and you're analyzing a business and you're trying to figure out what the value is to you. You want to first of all see what the profits are for the business. You want to project that out. Uh, because you're going to eventually use that to get the cash flow. But then you're thinking of the synergies as the sort of the extras, I guess, that you could also get from the business. So the additional revenue or the additional reduction in cost, which is also going to affect the profit as well. So I guess on the one hand, you have the standalone profits without synergies, and now you have the extras that you think you can extract because of synergies. So where would you like to go from there based off that information?
Perfect. So I think definitely would want to understand the drivers, for these revenue synergies and for the cost synergies. I think that would be important to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's work that you would do maybe for phase two. So for now, let's maybe just stick to calculating what, based off all that information, what you think a reasonable bid would be. And then we could maybe expand on that in phase two. How's that sound?
Perfect. Perfect. That sounds great. So I think in terms of, what an average or good bid should look like, we do have a profit of 700 million. My understanding of, bids, even for acquisitions or, for licenses. So we definitely want to understand what the historic trend has been in terms of profit, multiplied by maybe what the multiple is, for the different franchises. Do we have any information about that? Or, I can just assume, what that multiple would look like.
Ah, so on the multiples case, let's look at the footnotes, maybe. So we have profit multiple of 25x.
Yep.
And we've applied that to the operating profit that you think is attainable.
Yep.
Have we added the synergies as well to that?
So we can definitely do that. I think so. 700 million was the number that we had.
Mhm.
Adding the revenue synergies would be, 15 million, roughly.
Mhm.
And, just adding the cost synergies, that's 7 million,
Mhm.
roughly, looking for the numbers. So that's 722 million in terms of the average value that I'm expecting, pay after adding the synergies. So I think, that does sound like a reasonable, profitable bid, that we could expect for the license.
Okay, let me stop sharing. All good. So just to recap again where we are. So in terms of the bid you are suggesting the client goes for, what number is that?
722.
222. Got it. Okay, fantastic. So moving forward, the client has just walked in. They're private equity clients, so they are usually short for time. They would like a recommendation based off the case prompt, and they have about a minute or so before they need to dash off.
Perfect. Can I have a minute to synthesize my thoughts?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I think our recommendation to the client, the private equity firm, would be to go ahead and purchase a license in the IPL. For that, we've calculated average profits, and 722 million, does sound like the number that we would be expected to pay for the company. But based on a year basis, we will be able to draw back those profits after finding out our expenses. There are some risks associated with it. Most importantly, regulatory risks, in terms of expanding into a new country, but that can definitely be mitigated, by setting up a meeting with the IPL team to see, how our teams and how their legal teams, can work to mitigate those. In terms of next steps, definitely want to be sitting down with the IPL chief, to be showing our interest, projecting our, financial proposals to them and see, where it takes them. And I would definitely love to help you with that.
Okay, so that marks the end of the case, and I'm going to be giving feedback in detail. So just give me 1 sec. Fantastic. Awesome. So can everyone hear me? Great. So generally, like overall feedback, Rishon was a very strong candidate. So starting with the fit, he was a strong candidate with the fit. I think that was probably like a pass through. On the case, he was a strong candidate, but made some mistakes, especially around the maths and the insights, that might stop him from advancing from a round one to round two. So this is sort of very much a round one type case in terms of level of difficulty. But I think he was great overall, and I think extremely bold and confident to do this, and really good because there's parts where he really excelled in and parts where he dipped, which is great for the advantage of you guys because I can sort of go through what's good and what's not good and how you could improve on that as well. So the way I like to give feedback, usually when I case, I type and I'm scoring based off metrics. So what I'm judging or on what every interviewer generally will be judging based on. So I give a score 1 to 4, 1 being, very poor, 4 being excellent. It could obviously be above 4 if it's very commendable, and then comments as well. And I usually send these via email so that you're having a track of every single case, the case name, the dates, and then the exact feedback in very granular form as well. So starting with the first metric, case recap, very important. I thought it was a 4. It was a great recap. That wasn't a repeat of everything I said, which is very important. So sort of summarize the main business problem before heading on to the questions. Very, very important because you want to make sure you and the interviewer are leaving from the same bus stop, especially when the cases get more and more complex. So they can run into quite a few lines. You want to make sure that you're capturing the most important points, and also you know the exact business problem that you're trying to solve before you even do anything else. Just a quick heads up. So the metrics, the first 3 metrics are sort of case recap, clarifying questions, and case structure. The good news is that Rishon scored pretty much a 4 on all of these. The bad news is that no one ever gets through to the next round or gets an offer by scoring a 4. It's sort of like table stakes. You have to do it. Maybe you dip to a 3.5 somewhere, but you're never going to get an offer just based off getting a 4 on any of these. It's where the maths, insights, exhibit readings, brainstorms, the final recommendation, that's where you really want to shine, but you kind of have to do this as a hygiene test. Okay, so next point, clarifying questions. Some people don't really care about these, but I think they're very important in the sense that there's usually things that you can unlock from them, like extra information. So really good essential questions that scope the case. It was a 4 as well. I think here the rule of thumb for me is that you don't want to ask more than 4 questions, but the sweet spot is sort of 3. I think if you're going to ask a 4th one, then there has to be a very good reason why you're asking the 4th one, and it has to, be something that really does scope the case. There's a list of questions that you almost always want to ask, and I think Rishon did well there by sort of asking, is there a financial target they're trying to reach, for instance? Anytime there's an investment case, you want to ask that. The same way if it's a market entry case, for instance, or corporate case generally, most of the time, you're going to ask about geography. What's the scope of the geographical scope of the company that you're interested in? So there's a list of questions that are always going to be relevant. So it's worth having them to hand. I think Rishon could have probably asked one more question. Like, he was impressed with time, so he could have asked one more question, potentially around the business context. And here it could have been the fact that there's three new team licenses. He could have asked if there are any other bidders, so if this is a competitive round, or if it's pretty much his client is the only game in town, essentially. That could have helped maybe add a bit more context to his structure. Brownie points is that after asking each questions, it shows a lot of maturity and polish, I think. Just give a very short rationale as to why you're asking the question. So the way I sort of think about it is that if you had a new case and your manager or your principal sort of gives you this extremely vague case you're handling, the clarifying question is a way to structure that, to make sure that you scope the case so that you know what not to look for, which is as important as knowing what to look for as well. But when you're asking the questions to your manager or your principal, you sort of want to give a short rationale as well, just so that you're not just shitting from the hip. So I think that's a really good brownie point to add as well. Okay, so on the case structure, 3.5/4, so sort of borderline, good, definitely not going to knock it down. So commercially sensible buckets, which are very important. You don't want to sort of boil the ocean. You want your buckets to be as aligned in terms of importance to the case prompt. And I think Rishon did that very well. I think the drivers under those buckets were good and they were well explained as well. I think in terms of the communication style, it was pretty good. I could tell when he was transitioning from one bucket to the other. So not much to really push on there. Why isn't it a slam dunk 4? I think he could have added a bit more on valuation straight off the bat. And the fact that he didn't do that also showed up in the calculations towards the end. So we'll talk about that later. But it's an investment case, whether it's a private equity investor or corporate investor, you always want to sort of bring out valuation as a bucket. And then under that, sort of explain, well, to get the valuation, you're going to have to project cash flows, but you're not going to do that in a real case most times. So you want to just talk about revenue drivers, some cost drivers as well. You don't have to list all of them out, but I think listing some of them out shows a lot of commercial sensibility. So you definitely want to do that. And that's probably why it wasn't a straight 4. But the whole point of a case structure, essentially, because when I was prepping for Bain, I always thought, why do we always do this? Is it sort of something you have to do? in reality, when you're actually in consulting, your case structure is essentially the case plan. So it actually makes a lot of sense to sort of see how you would scope out a case. And each of those buckets are essentially work streams that a consultant will have autonomy over. And then the drivers under that are things that consultants and maybe AC, so analysts, would also have autonomy over as well. So a consultant could hold one or two work streams, maybe the principal holds, another work stream, and then overlooks the entire case. And then the drivers are things that you would literally tell people, go look at this. So go figure out, what's happening with revenue, go figure out what's happening with cost, go figure out the impact of this risk. So it's actually quite important. For those who thought it was useless. I was one of those who thought it was useless before I actually started working in consulting. Okay, so on to the fun part. Case Matt and Insight, the first one. I thought he did an excellent job in the first one. So it was a 4/4. Great quick insights off the bat, which always sets off really good momentum. And he was generally very confident in communicating problem approach. He got the maths really quickly. He noted that there was a segmentation between the really good teams and what their profit was, and then the less than stellar teams and what their profit was as well. So he noticed the segmentation, which is very important. You always want to look out for segmentation. He did the maths really well. He communicated the approach before doing the maths, which is so important because one, it's just a better way to structure things. Like it's the right precedence, and consultants are obsessed with, order of things. But then two, had he screwed up the maths, which was hopefully unlikely because it was pretty straightforward maths. But if it was more complex maths, like a round two and a very deep operational case, I would have probably given him the benefit of the doubt because he structured the problem very well. And I would be able to tell where things went wrong. If you don't structure the problems well, and well, yeah, I would definitely come back to you once I finish this, I promise. If you don't structure the problem well and you don't communicate the structure and you screw up the maths, then you're totally toast. Like you're pretty much not finished, but you're going to get points deducted. So you definitely want to structure the problem before then going on to do the maths. So lots of candidates talk about how, sometimes they're really good at insights, sometimes they're not. And the truth is that there is a way to be repeatably good at insights. So the structure, the formula I usually go through is 1, 2, 3. So one, talk through what you're seeing. So take a bit of a deep breath and tell the interviewer that you want to talk through what you're seeing for the first 30 seconds. It's a way of getting the panic out from your head. And you usually will probably see something that's interesting. And so that would be like a great insight that you're putting points on the board essentially, right? So that you don't feel like you are rushed. So you sort of take that first 30 seconds, explain to them that you're talking through what you're seeing, and you put some points on the board as well. Great. So second thing is drawing important insights. So here you want to micro focus your brain and say, okay, what's interesting? So what Roshan did really well was that he noticed, there are two segments. There's really good teams, there's really bad teams, and inevitably there was a correlation between that, so where the team finished, and also the profit they were getting annually as well. So you want to like really look in and say, are there footnotes? Are there things? Are there correlations? Are there interesting things that sort of really stick out? And here you also want to link. So you want to link what you're seeing to your case prompt. Like, is there anything from the case prompt that would make this exhibit more interesting? And you want to link to prior exhibits as well. So if you've already had an exhibit or a few exhibits and you've gotten some really interesting insights there and answers, you want to link it to what you're seeing as well. So here's where you take your time to really like put everything together. And my best practice is that you want to say the most interesting points, but really go for it. Like, don't just talk about everything and see what sticks. So, don't make it like spaghetti, throwing spaghetti on the wall, but like go over and beyond. And what does over and beyond mean? It's like every insight you can squeeze out, just squeeze out. Like say it's don't keep it in your head. And then the third point is so what? Okay, so you've talked through the insights really quickly. You've then sort of hyper-focused to really draw some interesting insights by linking. Then the so what is, okay, given all these things I know, how can I link that to moving forward with the business problem? Like what are one or two things that I could do to do that? And again, here Roshan did that really well because he noticed that there was a correlation between how good the team was and their profits. So then I think I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth. He might have spoken about trying to make sure the team is good, like, investing in the quality of the team. That's the so what, right? Like that's the next inevitable step. So again, here, I think the trick to getting brownie points as well is many times the so what is actually a bit of a brainstorm because it's like, okay, do this. then the next thing a great candidate will say is, here are the three things I could do to do this, right? So if investing in the team is the imperative, then give us three things you would do. Maybe go find a legend, uh go find great coaching staff, like whatever you need to do, right? So you make it a bit of a mini brainstorm. So he did really well there altogether going forward. So where he struggled and what would have probably stopped him from getting into round two was the second exhibit. So here he struggled a bit. Now, I don't want to fault him too much, but I guess like because I could tell that where he was really struggling with was getting the concept of synergies and how that would apply into the profits. So that's just a gap of knowledge, which is a bit annoying because if he knew that, he probably would have aced it. But because it's something that a lot of interviewers would expect you to have seen repeatedly, it's not an excuse. So he probably wouldn't get through to round two. So here, what he had to do essentially was add the synergies, revenue and cost synergy. Maybe first of all, spend a bit of time talking about what the revenue and cost synergies actually might be, which would have been really good. So like just listing out one or two, cross-selling with, nutritional or the nutritional company in the team, maybe doing advertising, using players to advertise to boost growth, uh, something along those lines. Maybe on marketing as well, potentially, like one bigger marketing budget. So stuff around that. So just quickly talking through that, and then basically adding the revenue and cost synergies to the standalone profit of a championship winning team, because the footnote said you should assume that you're going to get a championship winning team. That's the assumption you're working on. So you wouldn't take the average profit. You would just take the 28 million for the better teams and then add the revenue synergies, add the cost synergies. That would have given you 50 million. And then you would have applied the multiple, which is 25x, to give you 1.25 billion as the valuation. But that wasn't the question, the main question. And that's why it's always important to keep sort of, as you keep going through the case, highlighting what the main problem you're solving is, which is what the bid was. So we know that they want to, they want a 20% discount essentially between the valuation and the bid. So you then have to take that 1.25 billion and apply 80% to it to get the actual bid. So if it's valued at 1.25 billion, they're going to be bidding somewhere around 1 billion. And then that's it. You pretty much cracked the case. So moving on to the final recommendation, even though his recommendation was wrong in terms of the number, I still give it a 4 because the structure was perfect. And this is one of those places where you don't want to be a hero. You can add flourish, but you need structure. And the structure is basically, you can spend the first 5-10 seconds recapping the case and what you have to solve, or you can just go straight into the recommendation. That's fine as well. But very firm recommendation, like high conviction. This is exactly what we want to do. Consultants are paid for conviction, even if it's borrowed conviction. So you don't want to sound like you're sitting on the fence, essentially. So recommendation, supporting data, 1, 2, 3. So here I advise going for 2 to 3 points. And one of those points almost always has to be a number, right? Sometimes it can be 2 numbers because you might have calculated more than one thing, but it has to be a number that justifies the rationale. So in this case, it would be the bid. But for some of the supporting data as well, you want to get something qualitative. So you want to go to your case structure or any other case creative brainstorming session you might have had done as well, and basically drag that into the supporting data. So here's why they should do this. Here's the number, but here's a bunch of other things as well that supports that. 2 risks, 2 next steps. And there is literally a bank of risks for almost every case type. You want to specify it so that it's, it doesn't sound like you're being generic, but it's great to know the generic so that you can then apply it to the actual case type as well. And finally, case leadership, which is just executive presence, essentially. Like, did he handle himself really well? Was he friendly? Was he affable? Was he collaborative with the interviewer? That sounds like a given, but there are some interviews where the interviewer is literally almost telling the interviewee is telling the interviewer to shut up, and then it's an obvious automatic fail. So he was highly collaborative, very enthusiastic. He drove the case forward, except for the one part where there was a bit of a gap of knowledge, but he really drove the case forward. He was always providing, okay, here's what we should do next. Here's where I think we should go next. Here's the important thing to do next. Here's how I would prioritize this, which is really strong. So stopping there because we're 1 minute over and I need time for questions. Very strong candidate, probably would have been borderline. If it was a good candidate pool, probably wouldn't have gotten the second round because of he fell short on the second exhibit because of a gap of knowledge, but it's an expected thin to know. So that probably wouldn't, sadly wouldn't count, would still count against him. But yeah, let me know what you guys think and any questions.
Amazing. Wow. Well
Ah,
done. Thank you so much, Tobe and Rashawn, for a great case here. Since we're over time, we're going to take 2 to 3 questions here and then wrap it up. But first, I'd like to go to YouTube. I thought that was a good question there from Raphael. Question was, is it standard practice to state a hypothesis before laying out the framework? Tobe, I'll give that to you.
very short answer, no. I personally find it annoying. Some people don't mind it, but in my mind, I'm like, you have nothing to really go on at all. So what are you talking about? I don't think you're going to get the, I don't think you're going to not pass the case because of that. I find it cringy. Some people probably don't mind, but I think it's a stylistic preference.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. All right, let's go to the chat here. Could you repeat what great clarifying questions are? What are some of the kind of classic clarifying questions?
Okay, so standard one is geography because you want to, and it's always going to be reasonable because you want to know what the scope is. Here, it wouldn't have really worked as much to an extent because it was the Indian Premier League, but you could have actually asked, well, is it purely in India? Because actually, one of the clarifying answers was that they're thinking of expanding it to the Middle East, right? So geography almost always pops up over and over again. Another one is if there are any secondary goals. So are there any sort of, usually you get a primary objective, but are there any secondary objectives that you need to have in mind as well? That is usually a really big one. Uh, and then I think a really big one as well is just the business context and the business model. So if you get into a case where you absolutely have no idea how the industry works, how the business makes money, you have to ask. You're not going to be a hero for not asking, and it would just destroy your entire case. And you don't get deducted any points for not asking. So you want to sort of maybe couch that by saying, here's what I think happens, but can you clarify and can you let me know if that's actually reflective of reality? So it doesn't sound like you're just sort of begging, but you definitely have to clarify on the business model. So those are some really classic ones as well.
Wonderful. All right. One or two more. In the final recommendation, should you include next steps?
100%. So this is one of those cases where structure is like 95% of whether or not you ace the section. Recommendation, very, very strong, firm recommendation. Don't sit on the fence. Like it's very soggy. So very strong recommendation. Supporting data, 1, 2, 3. Almost always have to have a number because you've calculated something. So if you've done 2 exhibits where you've calculated 2 numbers, bring all the numbers in, like all the numbers you can bring them in. And then one qualitative one for why you're suggesting what you're suggesting. Usually that will come from brainstorm or it can come from the stuff you didn't really explore in your case structure. And then 2 risks and 2 next steps. If you're really struggling with risk and next steps because your mind goes blank, you can say 1 for each, but say with confidence. But yeah, you definitely need a risk in the next step.
Beautiful. All right, Tobe, I really appreciate your expertise. I wish we had another hour to dive into more questions. But folks, yeah, look, we're available, so reach out to us, team@managementconsultant.com, with any questions, and we'll answer them or direct them to Tobe as need be. Book a session with Tobe. Check out the QR code here. We'll send out some links when we send out the recording of this later this week as well. Appreciate you, Tobe and Rashawn, and everybody else for joining today. We'll see you either on Thursday for our Women in Consulting panel or on Tuesdays at 5 for a live call. We've got the consulting salary report dropping in just a couple of weeks, and that call is on the 28th. So hope to see you there.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rashawn, for being bold enough to do this as well. And thanks
Thank you,
everyone
Toby.
else.
Thank you, guys.
Anytime. Bye.